Welcome to today's video. Today we will be looking at move 1 b3 and how to win with it. So b3 on the first move, not super common, but it is quite interesting and quite underrated. And we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. So b3 on the first move, the clear intention being to place the bishop on b2 to fianchetto it behind the pawn. Now we're going to look at two moves here for black, e5 and later d5. E5 is the main move. Most people reply with E5, so we'll look at that first. That is more important. And of course, bishop B2, we start our attack on the pawn, and that's going to be a key theme in this line. A lot of pressure on E5, like a lot. It doesn't stop anytime soon. So black is going to have to follow suit and guard the pawn with the knight. And now we play E3, the intention being to place the bishop on B5, trying to remove the knight and leave the E5 pawn defenseless. That is the idea. That is the hope. And now here the main move by far is d5. So now they've got two nice center pawns, but it is not going to be of huge concern because we're going to go here, pinning the knight now, and suddenly we do threaten to capture on e5. So if they were to waste a move here, say they play h6, we could instantly capture on e5 because the knight can't recapture because it's pinned. So we have a clear threat here, and they handle that by playing bishop d6 to guard the pawn. All right, so far, so good. Our position is totally fine. We're going to keep the pressure up on the pawn, but we have a couple of options here. We will look at the two best moves. There is knight f3, and then there's f4. All right, we'll look at knight f3 first. That seems to be the more, generally considered to be the more solid option of the two. So knight f3, and black will often play queen e7 here. They're continuing to guard the pawn. So we're the ones applying all the pressure so far. You can look at the evaluation here. It's completely even, but we are the ones attacking every move. They're having to defend every move. If they make one wrong move, they would be losing. So the pressure is on them to find all the best moves. So far, so good. And now here we have a bit of a choice. Some people like to just castle here. Some people like taking this knight. I would tell you it's a little soon to take the knight. You could do that later if you need to. Some people like d4. I don't love the idea of allowing e4, so I wouldn't recommend you playing d4. I would say play c4. Apply pressure to the d5 center pawn now and see what they do. It could be very easy to mess this up. If they lose focus and they let you capture it, that would be great. Probably won't happen. Perhaps they play a6 and force you to take the knight. That would be pretty nice of them. And then maybe you get some play on the c file. So you go queen c2, threatening to take it, go this way. That would be pretty pleasant. It's already going up in our favor. I wouldn't anticipate a6 though. By far the most common move here is taking, which is the right move. So I would definitely expect that. And here I would recommend taking back with your pawn. At some point, you are going to take the knight with your bishop, and the point is that they're going to have doubled pawns on the c-file, so that's going to be better for you. Now black is likely to play knight f6. I'm basically putting in the most commonly played moves for black here. And then we have a really funny idea right now, and it's to play c5, the point being they must take. We are forcing them to take the pawn, because otherwise we take them, right? It's a take or be taken situation for black, so they are going to take. And now we take the knight, because at the end we get the e5 pawn. So we gave up the c pawn in order to take their center pawn. So that stands to reason, positionally speaking, that would improve our position. We have some sort of advantage there, especially if we get our own pawn in the center. You know what? You don't even have to take with the knight if you don't want to. You could go bishop takes as well, with the idea being to bring your bishop to the center and keep your knight on the king side, and all your pieces are aimed at the king side at this point, except this knight, which you're going to loop around later, perhaps, and you're looking to play d4. However you recapture on e5, you're going to play d4 at some point. You're going to castle. You're going to develop your knight. I would play bishop takes, personally. I don't believe it matters which way you take the pawn. They're both very good. Black will castle. You castle. The most common move is bishop to g4. And you can pretty much ignore that. They don't have any true threats. Ignore that, meaning if they take the knight, it's fine. Just make sure you don't hang a bishop. If you're passive here, say you miss a move, you'd have to be very careful not to go takes, and then drop the bishop. Even if you played, say, knight c3 and let this happen, it would actually be okay since you have time to take their knight. But that is an unnecessary risk, in the event you play too quickly and blunder somewhere. Anywho, play d4 right here, support your bishop, attack their bishop, and this looks fairly pleasant. They will likely go here, offering you the trade. Do not take it. In fact, don't even move your bishop. You just go here. Right? If they capture on e5, you capture with your pawns. We'll put it on the board here. They capture, you capture. You've got an annoying pawn on e5, sending their knight somewhere else. If they go to d5, okay, that's fine. They're not threatening anything. You go queen c2. You bring your rook to c1 pretty quickly and play on the c file. More realistic is knight d7 for the threat on the pawn. You can ignore that and go queen a4. If they go takes, and takes, this should be in white's favor with you having the more threatening queen, given that the pawn on c7 is so weak, whereas you don't really have any weak pawns under threat from their queen. So all in all, this is fairly even, with white having some winning chances and black not really getting chances. And keep in mind, this was with black playing mostly all the correct moves as well. There's a good chance that if you try this out, they're not going to find every single correct move. Now, all that being said, let me go all the way back to move 4. This is where I said we had two good options. There was knight f3 and there was f4. Now, knight f3 is considered the best move, the most solid move. I think you have higher winning chances if you play f4, right? If you play f4, it looks pretty ambitious. You have some immediate concerns on this diagonal, or at least it looks that way. Those aren't necessarily valid, though. For example, let's say that they capture the pawn, and many people would capture that pawn. You now are able to play bishop takes g7, trapping their rook, which you will win at some point in this game. That is the idea behind playing f4. Get them to capture so you can capture that pawn with your bishop. They will likely attempt to play queen h4 check, and this looks pretty scary. If you don't make the correct move, you're done. This is game over. If you go g3, they're going to take, and then you've got some major problems. g3, they take. You see the eval bar just shoot down right there. They're threatening g2 with a discovered check, and then a promotion following that. Looks pretty rough. It's not going to be fun to deal with that. And here, if you play king e2, well, then they go queen g4, and you're not winning their rook anymore. You're going to be down a piece. I don't think you're going to like that. So right here, you have to find king f1. That is absolutely the only move. And they'll drag this out a little longer. They'll take here. And now please, please, please do not capture the rook. I would hate to see you get checkmated right here. That would be brutal. You got to take back here first. Watch out for what they are doing before you proceed with your plan. That's something you should always do in a game of chess. Don't just rush through with playing your plan. Watch out for your opponent's plan. There are two people playing the game. Right here, probably I'll drag it out even more, attack your queen. Go knight f3 and attack their queen. They'll take, you take, and they're out of moves to stall the position. They'll castle here. And finally, you can take the rook, and after all that, you're up material. Now, it's going to take a little more effort to actually win this game. Despite being up a rook, it is only plus 2.5 here, for good reason. I mean, your king is not super safe, after all. And, I mean, they got a queen in h4, and this bishop is fairly decent. If you're not careful, things can go wrong. There's not too much to worry about, especially if they let your bishop get out of there. They probably should play f6 and try to keep the bishop at the back there. But in any case, you're up material here. And as long as you don't hang any pieces for no reason, you should win the large majority of the time here. Now, let me take you back to f4. Not everyone's going to take. In general, when you take that pawn once and you lose, you don't do it again. You learn from it the first time and it doesn't happen again. So instead of taking, there are alternatives here. Some people will play f6. That is the main alternative to that move. And here I would recommend something interesting where you take and they take and you go knight f3 now. All right. So here it's interesting. They're going to guard the pawn, right? Because you're now threatening to win the pawn. You have two pieces attacking it. They only have one currently defending it. Due to the knight being pinned, it's not actually guarding it. Most people play queen e7, which is correct. And now here is where it's interesting. Okay, you could simply castle here and you would have pretty good play with the rook being on f1 and that file being mostly open. However, there is something very interesting you could try here. You could proceed with taking on e5 because they will take back as they should. You take the knight with check, and over 90% of the time, you can look up the stats on a database, 90% of the time, people will take the bishop. And now you have queen h5 check. Move their king anywhere, block the check, whatever they want to do. The bishop is hanging now. You're going to capture it. So say they go king d8, you go queen takes bishop, and look at that. After all of that, you are up a pawn. If they trade queens, that's fine. If they don't trade queens, you're happy to keep your queen on the board. Either way, you're up a pawn and you're in good shape moving forward. The risk that comes with this, however, is back here. I told you 90% of the time they will capture the bishop. What about the other 10% of the time? If they slow down and they really think here, and they still might miss it, but if they slow down and think really hard, they may find king d8. And then, this is a little trickier, there's no queen h5 check anymore, right? And now you have two bishops that are in danger at this moment. And the thing is, you can't save them both. You can try. If you capture here first, for example, you look like you're going to save it, but now they capture with their queen, and the problem is you don't have time to save the other bishop because you have a rook hanging in the corner. So that's not super pleasant. So back here, you're in a tough spot at this point. You can't save everything. And even if you do, they probably are going to have queen h4 at some point, and your king is stuck in the center of the board. So they aren't even going to mind being down a one pawn at this point. They have enough play to compensate for it. So that is the risk associated with this. I would tell you it's probably worth taking the chance, given that, again, 90% of the time, people will capture the bishop, and you will get to go queen h5 check and win material. If you're uncomfortable playing into that, if that's the case, that's totally understandable. Then back here, you could change course and instead just get castled here, and it would still be close to even, slightly better for black. If they don't find the best move, it goes back to even or even better for you. So this would be playable too. This is not something that would be bad or anything. This is a very nice position to have. That would be on move 5, playing f4. If they take, you're already winning. If they play f6, you can play into a line where 90% of the time you end up winning a pawn, which is pretty nice. That's a nice weapon to have. And right here, there aren't really any other commonly played moves, so those would be the main two you need to know about. And the ideas tend to be the same anyway. If they happen to play some other moves, say they go queen e7 here, you just go knight f3, right? You're going to keep pressure on their center either way. So you've got the main ideas there. I want to go back to move 1, actually. So we covered the main things here with e5, bishop b2. Everyone plays knight c6. Everyone plays d5. You pin the knight. They go here. And then you have the choice between the more solid knight f3 and the more ambitious f4. That tends to come down to your personal preference of playstyle. But on move 1, what if they don't even play e5? Right, we won't spend too much time on this. You just need to know what exactly you should go for. If they play d5, you're not going to get anywhere near the same type of game because they don't have a pawn on e5 for you to attack, and that is basically the main thing of this opening. But you still play bishop b2. Ideally, they will play knight c6 and then e5 and turn it into the same thing. But if they choose not to and they play knight f6, I would recommend you play what you would have played if it was the other line we just looked at. Just play e3 anyway. And let's say they go e6. So they're just being super dull and solid right now. They're not giving you anything to attack, but this is still a nice enough position to play. I would proceed with knight f3. Let's say they go here. And instead of d4, like you would often get in these types of positions right here, I would say go ahead and go c4. Because there is the chance that they capture that pawn and then you get to bring your bishop out. And those are not bad places to have a pair of bishops. And maybe later you'd go queen c2, bishop d3, something like that. You have more space this way. However, oftentimes they will castle here. Now I would actually recommend playing d4 because the best move and most common move is c5. So far, so good. Completely equal. But this is where white can build some sort of advantage. So I would say you take right here, okay? And large majority of people will recapture instantly as well. And now you capture here, they capture here, and what just happened is they have what we call an isolated center pawn. So that pawn is going to be a big target for white to go after now. So we didn't get the same target that we got in the other line we looked at here, but we still create a target, and it's something for us to go after. And that's pretty important. So now say we go bishop e2. Common move is knight c6 here. Go ahead and get castled. For whatever reason, a lot of people really love bishop g4. It doesn't actually do a whole lot except bringing the bishop out into the game, but you're not worried about them taking the knight because you take back with your bishop and apply pressure to d5. Right here, ignore it. You go knight c3, keep the pressure on d5. Say they go rook e8. You want to go rook c1, get your rook on the c file. This is a good file, especially with their bishop there. And I'll tell you what, it's only plus 0.3 for white here. As someone who has had this position with black before in an over-the-board game, I'll tell you, this is not fun for black to play. Not at all. I played this over the board with black, and it took one tiny inaccuracy for my position to get worse. It's kind of crazy, but when you've got an isolated center pawn, that's really what it can take. One tiny mistake, and suddenly it's a terrible game. And that bodes well if you're playing white here. It's just so much easier for white to play, and I would definitely enjoy playing this position. You've got a target on d5. You've got the c file. I'm sure you could kick in h3 at some point, make the bishop move. You have some ideas of playing knight d4 at some point if you want. Or you could go knight b5, knight d4. It's a great spot for a knight. Put your knight in a4 if you want. And this bishop is just going to be feasting. Have a lot of room on that diagonal. Maybe at some point in the future, this guy moves to d3, and you have this diagonal. But basically, you've got plenty of space to work with. They have weaknesses, and you don't. And that's the type of position you want, generally speaking. If you can't get them to blunder, you want positions where it's easier for them to mess up than it is for you. Give your opponent all the chances to blunder that you can. To recap, let me take you all the way back to move 1, b3, d5. Just play the same setup you were going for with bishop b2, e3, knight f3. We're going c4 here. We don't get to go bishop b5 if they don't go knight c6. If they do go knight c6, let's say back here they go knight c6, maybe then you throw in bishop b5. That would be fine. But if they don't, then you don't need to put your bishop on b5. You go c4, and now you go d4, and then look at the center. That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And if they play it differently, let's say they go c6 instead, that would be nice and solid. You can just bring your bishop to d3. You could think about putting your queen on c2 and line up your pieces that way. Knight's coming to d2. You're going to have good pieces for your squares to go to and lots of space. It's not going to be as fun as a position like this where you clearly have a pawn to go after on e5. It would be perfectly playable in any case, and that's what we were going for. So that is move 1 b3, how you can win with it. Some very interesting ideas in there. So congratulations on learning how to win with move 1 b3. If you're interested in learning how to play the Italian game, by the way, then click the video that is appearing somewhere on the screen right now. And there you go. Hope you learned a thing or two here. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.